Trigger warning. This chapter of the fantasy novel Elemental Power has scenes which could be disturbing to some listeners, particularly survivors of ritualistic abuse. This book is not for children. Listener discretion is advised. This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 14, Butterflies. "I want to go home," I screamed. I was tied to a large table, naked again, of course. The hooded men were all around me, each holding a knife. The TV was playing. It showed me the scene just after the balloon took off without Dorothy. The good witch told her she had the power all along, and that now her ruby slippers would work. She could go home. I wished desperately to be home, but no such luck. I felt the stinging pain as one of the monks made a superficial slice just above each ankle, all the way around. The blood began to spill. He sliced from that cut down to the top of each foot to my toes. The other monks began peeling off my skin. I screamed and struggled until I just couldn't move any longer. I began to fade out, the pain too much to bear. I turned my head and vomited, nearly choking on it. Above me, a giant butterfly flapped its wings. It landed on my chest, staring into my eyes. I asked it, telepathically, to tell me how to be free. The butterfly took flight, swirling above me. I reached out to it and found my arms were able to move. I soared upward, met it in the air, and looked down at myself being tortured on the table. The good witch's voice said, "Now close your eyes and tap your heels together 3 times, and think to yourself, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home." I saw my bloody feet, ruby red and shining wetly, click the raw tendons of my heels together 3 times. Saw my mouth move and speak those words, but the real me was up here with the butterfly. I was no longer in pain. I was free. Even my body down on the table had stopped resisting. A dark, terrible voice spoke above me. "Now she is ready." My teacher looked up at the voice, through me and the butterfly. He looked back down at the table. "Good girl, Alana," he said. "You play with the butterflies. Go through that mirror and over the rainbow. Everything will be all right." I hesitated, wondering what would happen to my body. Something like thick, dark smoke detached itself from the ceiling and shot down into my flesh. I saw myself shake, lifting from the table, breaking the bonds holding me down. The monks around me fell to their knees, knives clanging on the tiles. My teacher bowed low before it. "Great one," he said, not daring to look. "Pretty Lord, we are your servants." "Arise, slave," the dark voice spoke from my mouth. "We have much work to do." I'd had enough. The butterflies were so beautiful, so friendly. I floated down to the mirror and pushed through it, shattering the glass as I passed. Peta was whispering to someone near the door. I was finding it hard to breathe. My mouth was dry, my eyes were too, and I felt like I couldn't bear one more minute of this. I wiggled my toes, remembering the stinging pain of my little girl feet being skinned. Why did the perverts always have to keep me naked? No wonder I had an aversion to nudity. No wonder I'd been 30 before. Glenn's face popped up in my field of vision and I screamed, not only from fright, but also from the state of his once handsome features. His eyes were swollen shut. His mouth bled from several splits. He tried to smile, and it broke my heart. "Glenn," I whispered. "Alana, I don't have much time. One of the wind sprites has brought my image to you. They said you were near death. They tell me you're remembering more now. That's good. That's what they fear the most. There is something inside you that you need to discover. You are strong. I will not leave you. Don't you dare leave me," he choked. He turned his head sharply and whispered, "I have to go. I love you." "I love you too." I felt my heart rip apart. It wasn't merely emotional pain. Something in my chest was broken, shards bursting off and sticking in my lungs. "I'll see you soon," he whispered. He was gone. Rage and desolation erupted in a fit of violence. I couldn't contain it. I thought briefly of the butterfly method of escape and cast it aside. Something wasn't right about that. It took years of torture to get me to that point. Peta was there beside me, holding me in her arms. She was incredibly warm, both body and soul. The melody of her lullaby floated over me, easing the waves of frenzied emptiness that threatened to pull me down and choke out my life. I couldn't die. I had to free Glenn. I flailed about in pain and impotent rage, held down by the fire sprite. "You can do this," Ambius's voice spoke from my other side. He was there, a mere shadow of himself, but there enough that I felt the pressure of his hand on my cheek. "I know it's difficult. I can't imagine your pain, but you've only just begun. You survived it once. Remember that. You survived what hundreds of others could not. If you give up now, no one would blame you. But not only will Glenn die, this entire world will perish. We will be destroyed, and all the magic and power held here will be the warlord's, and he will use it to destroy your world as well. I have faith in you. We all do." Suddenly, the images of all 4 watchers were gathered around me. Worm was there too, the giant earthworm. I hadn't met him yet, but a smaller version of him was there with Silver, Rock, and Ambius. They stood united, smiling faintly. They were encouraging me, somehow strengthening me for the next round of horrors. I glanced weakly at them, each one in turn, then faded again. I was older, about 13. There was no more teaching. I was a prisoner, alone in a bedroom plastered with butterfly drawings. Had I drawn those? "We're off to see the wizard" began playing loudly. I instantly slumped back onto the bed and the real me floated above my body. A dark mist flowed into my nostrils and my eyes popped open, now red. The monks came in, bowing. I stood, thankfully wearing clothes this time, and led them out of the room. A large butterfly was there next to my astral self, but I ignored its pulling. It wanted me to go into the cracked mirror, but I had to see what was going on. I followed the procession down a dark corridor. There was a large, high-ceilinged room with a checkerboard floor, 2 pillars on one end, torches lit all around, and a great stone altar in the center. My mouth was giving commands in the evil voice. I was just a vehicle. The demon had possessed me. The monks placed the elements in the appropriate compass points around the altar. They were chanting something ominous. A little goat was led in from a side door. They lifted it up onto the altar and held it down. I saw my body raise a stone knife. My astral self, my real self, fled. I shot back into the butterfly room and through the mirror, where I was safe, and everything was rainbows. My lungs had barely filled with breath in the tent when I was flung back into the past. I was even older this time, about 16. I was sitting in the cell, missing my parents. I hadn't seen them in years. They were killed in a house fire while I was here. I knew they had been murdered so that I would live here permanently. My body was so thin. They were starving me again. They did so systematically, bringing me to the brink of death to break my will. They hadn't bargained on my stubbornness. I had been learning, exploring the astral planes on my own. I could leave my body without their infernal triggers. I was getting stronger. Once, I had even resisted the trigger and remained in my body. The mist was locked out. I had laughed at him. That's when they stopped feeding me. Recently, while exploring the other dimensions, or whatever it was that I did, I came upon a friendly old wizard. He taught me how to resist the trigger by imagining myself glued to my own skin. I couldn't leave because I was glued in. It had worked. My physical strength was draining away, but my emotional strength was increasing as much as my hatred for my captivity. I was caged like a beast, ritualistically tortured, my body used to do horrendous things. They left me to myself while I was on my period, though. At least there was that tiny reprieve, but they would give me nothing for it, no means of hygiene at all. I was nothing but an animal to them, a body, an avatar. I was done with it. It had taken several years, but I had discovered a way to unlock my cage. Last night I had snuck out and gathered the elements, bringing them back with me. It was nearly the final check time. The monk would come, make sure I was alive, and then leave me in total darkness, cold and alone. I had the fire, water, earth, and my breath as wind, waiting to set me free. The monk came in, did as it usually did, checked my lock, turned off the lights, and left me there without a word. They never spoke to me, only chanted or responded when spoken to by that foul spirit that invaded my body. He always left a residual stench behind, like an oily film under my skin where his wickedness had touched me. I was ready to leave. There were risks to what I was doing, I knew, but something had to be done. They had me here for a reason, one other than to play marionette to that Lort thing. There was something about me that scared them. No matter what it took, whether I would die tonight or free myself, I didn't know, but I was going to try. Anything was better than this. The wizard had given me a spell. It had recently appeared in my head, and I wrote it with my own menstrual blood on my bedsheet. It would break the chains of my bondage here, allow me to walk out the front door unnoticed, but I would not be able to remember what had happened to me. I would have amnesia, an orphan with no memories, disconnected and alone. It was worth it. The weight of the torment had aged me prematurely. I had no idea what my peers were doing, no idea what was normal for a girl my age. I was entirely alone, but still, I wanted out. I struck the match and lit the tiny stump of a candle, placing it in the south. I heaped the earth in the north, poured water into the west, and breathed over the east. I took a piece of the shattered mirror and sliced my hand open, letting the blood drip on the bit of bedsheet I had written the spell on, in the center of the elements. I read, "I buy back my life with my own blood. By the power of the elements given to us through the Creator, and by my very blood I declare that I am now free. I am leaving. No one will stop me. No one will even see me, and none who knew me here will recognize me. I will become a wraith, faint and hard to grasp. I forsake Crigil Lort and refuse him entrance into my body from this moment forward. He is powerless without my flesh, and I will not allow him to touch it. By my blood and these elements I do command these things to be. By the elemental power in the earth and every other creation, I do command these things to be." I blew out the candle. I wrapped my hand carefully, gathered up my few things into a bundle, wrapped them in what was left of my bedsheet, and broke out of my cage. Spells only have power when believed. The wizard had taught me that. I did believe. I walked down the torchlit hallways, unsure where I would find the exit, but determined to find it nonetheless. Several monks passed me without turning their hooded heads in my direction. I was invisible. After an hour or so of trying every door I came to, I found the exit. I burst out of the doors and into sunlight, so dazzling. I ran with my arms out and my eyes nearly closed. I hadn't seen the sun in at least 4 years. They had been messing with my natural rhythms, making me sleep during the day to be awake for the rituals at night. Wrath pulsed from me as I ran, fueling my legs and carrying me for several miles before my emaciated form collapsed in the middle of a field, surrounded by cud-chewing cattle. I slept. I came back to myself, surrounded by everyone. The Watchers' projections were still there, and so were all the men in our group. I wasn't coated in sweat anymore, and I felt the muscles around my mouth strain from smiling. That last memory felt amazing. I had escaped. "You helped me," I said to Ambius hoarsely. "I did indeed," he replied, smiling. "Get some rest now. You are finished for tonight. You will remember more tomorrow, but for now, just sleep. You will need your strength for the journey. I will stop the dreams." "Oh, thank God," I said weakly, rolling onto my side and sighing as sleep came to relieve me from the pain. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.